There was a time when the sun never set on Roman ambition, when the empire stretched its iron fingers across continents, grasping lands and peoples beneath the weight of imperial banners, from the jagged highlands of Scotland to the scorched sands of Mesopotamia. Rome had conquered not just territory, but the imagination of the ancient world. It promised order, prosperity, and civilization. But behind that promise, carved in stone and silence, was a darker truth, one built on shattered tribes, broken treaties, and bloodied soil. At its height in 117 AD, under the rule of Emperor Trajan, Rome controlled more land than any Western power before it. Its legions marched with unyielding precision. Its governors ruled with bureaucratic efficiency and fear. Its emperors were gods among mortals, loved, feared, and eventually assassinated. This was not a golden age for all. For the millions living beneath the eagle of Rome, it was a time of crushing taxes, forced labor, and constant surveillance. This is the tale of how one empire ruled the world, not through wisdom alone, but through conquest, terror, and the cold machinery of control. This is Rome at its most powerful and its most perilous. Part 1. Iron and Laurel. The rise to absolute power. The world burned, and Rome thrived. In the black heart of empire, the scent of blood mixed with laurel oil. Beneath the marble colonnades and towering statues of gods carved in their own image, the rulers of Rome looked not west or east, but everywhere, for there was no direction they did not intend to own. By 117 AD, under the command of Emperor Trajan, Rome had become not just a kingdom or a republicate, was dominion incarnate, a living beast of iron sinew and golden breath that devoured the known world one province at a time. Trajan, the Optimus Princeps, the best ruler, was a soldier first, emperor second. The Senate praised him, the legions worshipped him, and the conquered feared him. He did not merely inherit the empire, he expanded it with methodical brutality, carving his name into the stone of cities and the bones of enemies. The empire's reach extended from the northern mists of Caledonia to the scorching sands of Arabia, Felix, from Lusitania's ocean-battered cliffs to the fertile crescent of Mesopotamia. No Roman before him had ruled such breadth. None after him would do so again. But this Rome, this apex predator of civilization, had not risen gently. It was forged in the agony of civil wars, sharpened by betrayal, and bathed in centuries of conquest. From the smoldering ashes of Carthage to the tamed chaos of Gaul, each victory came with a price. The Pax Romana, the famed Roman peace, was not a peace freely given, but one violently enforced. Cities were razed to build roads, cultures were erased to make room for aqueducts. Peace in Rome's time was silence in the provinces. Trajan had risen through this world like an eagle climbing from smoke. Born not in the city of Rome but in the provinces of Hispania, he represented something both feared and admired by the old aristocracy, a man of action rather than tradition. When he ascended the throne in 98 AD, chosen by Emperor Nerva, it was not his bloodline that made him worthy, it was his sword. He gave the people bread, yes, but also blood. The Dacian Wars, campaigns against the fierce tribes of modern-day Romania, became his crucible. The Dacians were no simple barbarians. They were hardened warriors, led by a King Decebalus, who understood that to resist Rome was not to merely risk death, but annihilation. They fought from the mountains, struck like wolves, and vanished. Trajan, however, would not be denied. The war was long, savage, and utterly final. In 106 AD, after years of sieges and rivers turned red with corpses, Dacia fell. Its gold mines, the richest in the known world, became Rome's new heart. The spoils of war flooded into the capital. With them came statues, baths, monuments, and the bones of a defeated people. Trajan celebrated his triumph as a sacred procession through the city, where slaves, kings, and exotic beasts paraded beneath his chariot wheels. The Roman people rejoiced. Their empire had grown. Their emperor was a god. But beneath the drums and incense, a darker rhythm beat. For every victory in the east, there was a cost in the west. For every city raised in honor of Rome, another was burned to ash. The frontiers trembled beneath the weight of expansion. The legions, stretched thin across 3 continents, marched not with pride, but weariness. They fought wars they did not understand, for emperors they would never meet, in lands that would never remember them. Rome's greatness was built not by statesmen, but by the faceless hands of the expendable. In the palaces of the Palatine Hill, marble glistened with candlelight. Senators spoke of glory and law, of the divine wisdom of Rome's mission. But in the provinces, survival was not a matter of lot, was a matter of adaptation. The conquered were forced to speak Latin, to worship Roman gods, to adopt Roman customs. Resistance was crushed. Entire tribes vanished from history, their names known only through the carvings of their conquerors. And yet, despite the iron grip of the empire, cracks began to show. Along the Rhine and the Danube, barbarian tribes gathered in restless murmurs. In the sands of Parthia, armies stirred with ambitions of their own. Even within Rome's borders, whispers of revolt echoed in alleyways and back rooms. The machine of empire had reached its peak. And like all machines built too grand, too vast, it had begun to creak beneath its own impossible weight. Still, for a moment, a brief, brilliant moment, Rome was eternal. Trajan had pushed the borders to their furthest reaches. Arabia, Petraea, Armenia, Mesopotamia, swallowed by Rome's insatiable appetite. The Senate erected Trajan's column, a towering spiral of sculpted conquest, depicting his victories in obsessive detail. It still stands today, not just as a monument to power, but as a warning. The higher the climb, the harder the fall. But in 117 AD, that fall had not yet come. Rome was a god among nations. Its legions were the wind, its ships darkened the seas, its roads pulsed like veins across continents. The emperor's name was spoken in dozens of languages. Statues of him stood in deserts and forests, on cliffs and beside riverbanks. The Roman eagle soared over temples built atop ruins, declaring that Rome had triumphed not just over peoples, but over time itself. And yet, in the hearts of the forgotten, the peasants taxed into starvation, the slaves crushed beneath stones, the soldiers dying nameless deaths in distant lands, there was no glory, only endurance, only survival. In the kitchens of a Syrian villa, a mother whispered lullabies in Aramaic, forbidden but remembered. In the frozen outposts of Germania, legionnaires huddled around fires, murmuring about home in accents the capital mocked. In the marble corridors of Rome, a young patrician plotted his rise not through battle, but through poison. The empire was whole, but within it, fault lines spread like veins beneath the skin. Trajan would die in that same year, 117 AD, far from Rome, in the city of Selinus. He died not in battle, but weakened by age and illness, one of the few emperors to fall to time, not treachery. His ashes were entombed beneath the base of his column, a god brought low, buried beneath stone. He left behind an empire at its greatest extent, but not its greatest strength. His successor Hadrian would retreat, rebuild, fortify, for he understood what Trajan had ignored, that no empire can expand forever. That power without limit is a weight no state can carry. The Roman eagle had soared too high, and now the descent would begin. But in the golden twilight of Trajan's reign, Rome stood unchallenged, unrivaled, unrelenting, and the world, from the northern seas to the Persian deserts, from the Nile's edge to the forests of Gaul, whispered one name in awe and fear: Rome. Part 2: Blood on the Borders, Life at the Edge of Empire. The world beneath the eagle was not all marble and triumphs. Far from Rome's gilded temples and perfumed villas, at the outer edges of empire, life was hard, cruel, and constantly on the brink of chaos. Here, Rome was not an idea. It was a shadow, heavy, cold, and relentless. At the borderlands, where mountains loomed and rivers flowed like veins of defiance, the illusion of imperial peace gave way to something far more raw: survival. Along the frozen limes of the Rhine and the storm-beaten cliffs of Britannia, the empire's grip was more iron than gold. Fortresses punctuated the landscape like blunt teeth, each one housing legionaries who knew that a moment's hesitation could mean death. These were not marble cities of debate and sculpture. They were mud-stained outposts of endurance, where men slept in their armor and drank to forget the screams of the forest. Every tree could hide an enemy. Every sunrise could bring a raid. The Roman frontiers were not lines on a map. They were lives. They were long watches in the cold, rusted blades held tight against breastplates as barbarian drums whispered across the hills. The soldiers stationed here were not pampered generals or marble-bathing aristocrats. They were hardened men, many of them born far from Italy, drawn from Numidia, Thrace, Syria, or the Germanic tribes themselves. Men who had traded their freedom for food, shelter, and the hope that their names might one day be carved in stone rather than forgotten in mud. These legionaries lived among danger, but also among those they conquered. Roman forts often sat beside native settlements, half coerced, half cooperative. Trade thrived under tension. Roman coins passed hands with local grain. Roman wine met Celtic herbs. And in the shadow of the walls, children were born who belonged to both worlds and neither. They spoke to tongues, wore mixed garb, prayed to Roman gods and local spirits alike. They were the human echoes of conquest, proof that empire was not just bloodshed, but transformation. Yet it was a fragile transformation. In Britannia, the wind seemed to whisper of old gods. The Druids, driven into the shadows, still gathered beneath the moon. Despite Rome's roads and forums, rebellion burned quietly in the hearts of the people. The legions here were always on edge. Even Hadrian Trajan's successor chose not to extend Rome's reach farther north. Instead, he built a wall, not to keep invaders out, but to trap order in. Hadrian's wall stretched like a scar across the land, 30 feet of stone and paranoia. Behind it, Rome administered civilization. Beyond it, wild freedom reigned. But that freedom came with a cost. It was cold, isolated, and dangerous. Rome called them barbarians, but they called themselves free. To the east, where the Euphrates shimmered under a desert sun, the border was more subtle but no less dangerous. Here, Rome did not face scattered tribes, but the Parthian Empire, its mirror, its rival, and its eternal problem. Battles were not always fought with swords, but with messengers and marriages. Treaties were made, broken, and remade. The desert itself became a weapon. Roman supply lines stretched like fragile threads across hostile terrain. Every camel and cart a gamble against heat and time. Still, cities blossomed along these frontiers. Palmyra, in Syria, was one of them, a jewel of the East, built by desert hands and Roman design. It blended cultures into a radiant contradiction. Roman colonnades stood beside Semitic shrines. Latin laws governed Aramaic whispers. Silk from China passed through its gates, taxed and documented by imperial scribes. Yet even here, the border's tension lived beneath the surface. In time, Palmyra would rise in defiance, led by Queen Zenobia. But in Trajan's day, it served as proof that empire could mean prosperity if only temporarily. To the south, in North Africa, Rome's borders met the desert. Carthage had long been reduced to memory and salt. But Roman control of Africa Proconsularis brought grain tons of it into the empire's hungry core. The people of Rome, far from the fields, rarely questioned where their bread came from. But the answer was here, in the back-breaking labor of Berber farmers and the watchful eyes of Roman magistrates. Every bushel harvested was another day of peace in the capital, and every failure to meet the quota meant punishment without mercy. The granaries of Egypt and Tunisia kept the empire's stomach full, but also reminded it of how dependent it had become. Egypt, especially, was no ordinary province. It was the personal property of the emperor, governed not by a senator, but by an equestrian. Rome's imperial class stood apart. Its people, heirs to pharaohs, now answered to faceless Rome. They paid their taxes in wheat and silence. Temples still stood in Thebes and Luxor, but their gods had no say in the laws written in Latin scrolls. And in Judea, the border was fire, ever simmering, never quiet. Rome's occupation of the Jewish homeland had been a lesson in miscalculation. Religious tension spilled into rebellion. The First Jewish-Roman War had ended in 70 AD, with the destruction of the Second Templar wound that would never heal. But by Trajan's time, new sparks had already begun to glow. His eastern campaigns into Parthia reignited Jewish resistance across the diaspora. In Cyrene, Cyprus, Mesopotamia, Jews rose in revolt. Rome responded with ruthless fury, turning cities to cinders and entire communities to graves. It was not justice, it was control. Because at the edge of empire, there was no room for leniency. Order was maintained with violence, and peace was purchased with fear. And yet, despite this brutality, life thrived in these regions not because of Rome, but in defiance of it. Families were raised, markets bustled, gods were worshipped in secret and in public. The empire wanted uniformity. What it got was compromise. Roman roads brought trade, but they also brought whispers, ideas from the east, magic from the south, and dreams from the north. Rome had claimed the body of the world, but it could never fully conquer its soul. On the border, every dawn was a question. Would today bring tribute or revolt? Would the patrol return or vanish into the mist? Would this outpost be remembered or buried in silence? To those in the heart of the empire, The frontier was an abstraction, lines and territories, discussed in Senate debates and marked on maps by men who never left their marble halls. But for the soldiers, the farmers, the wives and children who lived and died on those lines, Rome was not eternal. It was present. It was a tax collector knocking on the door. It was the threat of crucifixion. It was the sound of foreign drums just beyond the trees. And for the native peoples of these lands, Rome was a sickness and a structure, one that chained them to distant gods and unfamiliar laws, but also gave them roads, baths and coin. Their children grew up Roman without ever setting foot in Rome. Their loyalty was measured in silence, not affection. By 117 AD, the Roman Empire was at its peak, but its greatness was upheld not just by emperors and generals. It rested on the backs of those at the margins, those who bled in the fields, prayed behind closed doors, and stood watch beneath frozen stars. For every triumph celebrated in the Forum, there were 100 quiet sacrifices in the shadows. These were the forgotten pillars of empire, the blood on the borders. Part 3. Ashes of Ambition, the price of eternal dominion. In the glow of empire, ambition burned brightest, but it also burned hottest, and in time, it turned everything to ash. 117 AD, the Roman Empire stood supreme. With Trajan's death, it reached its greatest physical size. Its borders stretched from the storm-churned Atlantic to the heat-scoured deserts of Mesopotamia, from the wild highlands of Caledonia to the Nile's ancient course. A single political entity ruled over 60 million souls, 1/5 of the entire world population. And yet, the moment Rome declared victory over the world, it began to lose control of itself. Power without limits is not strength, it is burden. The empire Trajan built could not be held by swords alone. It was too wide, too complex, too fractured beneath the veneer of unity. The map may have shown one Rome, but it was many Romes, each with its own gods, grievances, and ghosts. Underneath the mosaic of conquest, something darker stirred. Exhaustion. The edges had been stretched too far. The heart beat too slowly. Hadrian, Trajan's successor, saw it clearly. He inherited not a triumph, but a warning. The legions were overstretched. The treasury bled gold faster than it could extract it. The provinces seethed with resentment. Hadrian did not seek more land. He sought to preserve what was already dying. He withdrew from the newly conquered Mesopotamian territories, abandoned glory for pragmatism, and focused on consolidating power rather than expanding it. It was not cowardice, it was the first act of imperial triage. But Rome was already shifting. No longer a ravenous beast devouring its neighbors, it had become a bloated god feasting on its own body. The ambition that had driven its meteoric rise had now become its undoing. The military consumed half the empire's budget. Roads and walls needed constant upkeep. Rebellions flared with increasing regularity, especially in regions where Rome had promised peace but delivered chains. The borders, once symbols of power, became lines of attrition. The walls of Hadrian, of the Danube, of Africa, none of them stopped the inevitability of entropy. The Roman machine was exquisite, but it was not eternal. Even its own people could sense the unraveling. In the streets of Rome, bread became scarce. Grain shipments delayed by storms or rebellion could starve thousands. Urban unrest was pacified, not by policy, but by spectacle. The Colosseum fed the crowds with blood when it could no longer feed them with wheat. The empire did not solve problems. It buried them under rituals, bureaucracy, and entertainment. The emperors changed. Some ruled with cruelty, others with vanity, a few with vision, but none could escape the curse of Rome's size. No one man could know its full breadth. The generals in the provinces wielded more immediate power than the emperors in Rome. The Praetorian Guard, once protectors, became kingmakers. Emperors lived in fear of betrayal, not from outside, but from within their own walls. And while the capital crumbled in decadence, the provinces changed in ways the Senate could not see. The Romanization of the world was never complete. Beneath the surface, cultures resisted. Old faiths endured. In Gaul and Britannia, Christianity began to spread not from imperial policy, but from persecution. The very religion that Rome sought to crush would one day become its spiritual center. Irony became history, and history became prophecy. By the 3rd century, the cracks widened into wounds. Plagues tore through the empire, killing millions. Economic collapse followed. Gold was devalued. Taxes skyrocketed. Emperors were assassinated almost yearly. The period came to be known as the crisis of the 3rd century. In less than 50 years, Rome saw over 20 emperors rise and fall, many dying by the sword, some never even making it to Rome itself. What had once been a unified empire began to fracture. The Gallic Empire, the Palmyrene Empire, breakaway states formed at the margins. Local leaders declared themselves emperors, and for a time, the very idea of a singular Rome seemed like a dying myth. But Rome, in its stubbornness, did not fall. Not yet. The empire adapted. It reformed its armies. It moved its capitals. Diocletian divided the empire to manage it better. Constantine, in a masterstroke, embraced Christianity and moved power eastward to Byzantium, renaming it Constantinople. In doing so, he preserved Roman structure in a new spiritual mold. But even these acts of survival came with a price. The original Rome, the city, the republic turned empire, the center of the ancient world, began to fade. It was no longer the source of power. It was a symbol. And symbols, no matter how mighty, are vulnerable to erosion. By the late 4th century, the pressure from beyond the borders became unbearable. The Huns pushed westward. Germanic tribes, once allies, sometimes enemies, were now desperate migrants, driven by fear, hunger, and chaos. Rome had relied on these tribes to fill its armies. Now, they overwhelmed it. In 410 AD, Rome was sacked by the Visigoths. The unthinkable had happened. For the first time in 800 years, the Eternal City was violated. It sent shockwaves across the known world. To many, it marked the beginning of the end. To others, it was just the empire's mask finally slipping. By 476 AD, the Western Roman Empire, what remained of it, collapsed entirely. The last emperor, Romulus Augustulus, a child, was deposed by a barbarian warlord. The empire's eastern half would live on as Byzantium, but the dream of the united Roman dominion, stretching across 3 continents, was finished. And yet, Rome never truly died. Its ashes fed the soil of future empires. Its roads became the arteries of Europe. Its laws formed the bedrock of Western justice. Its language shaped nations. Its ambition taught the world what was possible and what was fatal. The Roman Empire at its greatest extent was more than geography. It was a reckoning. It showed what civilization could build on, what it would destroy to maintain the illusion of order. It carved its legacy not just in stone, but in scars. It gave us triumphs and tragedies, ceilings painted with gods and gutters filled with corpses. It raised emperors to divine status and dragged them down into madness. It built systems so vast and efficient that we still walk them today on. Yet, it could not save itself from itself. For in the end, the empire was not brought down by a single enemy or a singular mistake. It was undone by its own ambition. The same ambition that had raised it to the heavens. The same ambition that had filled its halls with gold and blood. The same ambition that could conquer the world, but never conquer peace. Rome reached for eternity, and in doing so, it taught the world the cost. Until next time, stay safe, and see you in the next history.